The earliest days of the First Age were dominated by prosperity and increasingly close relationships between men, elves, and dwarves, but this idyllic status quo was not to last. Even as the War of Wrath came to its destructive conclusion and Beleriand was sundered, the lieutenant of Morgoth fled from the great host who had laid low his master, only to re-emerge at the most opportune moment. A being like the great deceiver Sauron could never truly be satiated by mere survival, and strove instead for true power. In his machinations to achieve what he desired most, the map of Middle-earth was once more to be altered. And in doing so, the fate of Middle-earth was once more to be placed upon a darker course than had been initially intended by the Valar. Welcome to our new season on the history of Middle-earth. Allow us to present the first episode of our series on the history of the Second Age of Tolkien's writings. And from the heroes of medieval fantasy to heroes of science fiction, there are similarly grand tales to be told up in space with the sponsor of this video, Star Trek Fleet Command, the 4X Star Trek MMO that's free to play on PC and mobile. Starfleet needs a new leader. Take control of a frontier starbase from which you and your crews will explore the entire galaxy, meet and greet its alien civilizations, and if it comes down to it, deploy powerful warships into battle, potentially against other players in PvP combat. As you explore the massive open world, you'll need to gather a crew, and of course loads of Star Trek favorites will be available to join your adventures, providing all kinds of buffs and guidance. With them at your side, the mysteries of the galaxy will be yours to solve, and dare I say, you'll be going where no man has gone before. You can get the game for free via our link in the description, or the QR code on screen on PC. But before you head in, remember the promo code WARPSPEED, which allows new players to claim a starter pack, including 10 shards of Kirk, an officer you'll definitely want to recruit. Get this pack by registering your Scopely account in the settings menu in-game, then signing into it via the redeem code option in the Fleet Command store, link in the description. Use code ENERGIZE on that page to send your rewards through to your game. Download the game for free right now, and go see what adventures await you in the growing online world of Star Trek Fleet Command. During the Second Age, Numenor prospered to such an extent that the race of man overtook the strength of the Eldar for the first time in the history of Middle-earth. Led by Aldarion, relations between elves and men continued to flourish, as Numenorian mariners traversed the continent at will. However, not all was well in Aldarion's personal life, as his devotion to the sea and travel caused a great rift in his marriage to Erendis, a tale which was to survive even the destruction of Numenor as Aldarion and Erendis, the mariner's wife. Under Aldarion's rule, the first Numenorian port upon mainland Middle-earth was established, when Vignalonde was constructed upon the river Gwathlo. To continue the expansion of the Numenorian fleets, the deforestation of the Enedwaith and Minhiriath was commenced, ensuring continued naval superiority for generations to come. Only a daughter was born to the king, Ancalami, so he changed the rules of succession. Agnatic primogeniture was replaced with equal primogeniture, allowing Ancalami to become the first queen of Numenor in the stead of her cousin Saronto, who had been heir presumptive at the time. However, even as Numenor was approaching the zenith of its power, the chief lieutenant of the Dark Lord Morgoth began to reveal himself. A new shadow arises in the east. It is no tyranny of evil men, as your son believes, but a servant of Morgoth is stirring, and evil things wake again. Each year it gains in strength, for most men are ripe to its purpose. Gil-galad in Aldarion and Erendis, the mariner's wife. Despite his inactivity in the earliest centuries of the New Age, Sauron had lost none of his malice and cunning. By SA 1000, he had gathered enough power to re-establish himself in the land of Mordor. Here he would build his seat, the great Barad-dûr, near the fiery pit of Mount Doom, and amass vast hosts of orcs, trolls, and many other creatures that had come to be through Morgoth's twisted machinations. Sauron was able to further twist the hearts of a number of the earliest nations of men, foremost among them the Easterlings and Haradrim, promising them wealth and power beyond their very reckoning in return for homage. Not long after the commencement of the construction of Barad-dûr, Tar-Ancalami came to the throne in SA 1075 as the first queen of Numenor, and the seventh ruler of that blessed isle. her reign was dominated by the necessity of producing an heir for fear of the usurpation of her line by her cousin Saronto, which she was fortunately able to achieve through the birth of her son Anarion. It was during this period that Sauron made his first entreaties to the elves who had remained in Middle-earth. However, the wise High King Gil-galad initially saw through this ruse. Meanwhile, the Numenorian grip on Middle-earth was continually strengthened, as more permanent havens were constructed from SA 1200 onwards, including the haven at Lond Dare. In SA 1350, the great elven leaders Celeborn and Galadriel left Eregion in favour of Lothlorien, with their daughter Celebrian in tow, which left Celebrimbor as the Lord of Eregion. This was to have devastating consequences, as in SA 1500, Sauron, in the guise of Anatar, who claimed to be a Maya come from Valinor and having previously served Ó'hÁinle, came to visit Eregion. He quickly befriended the great smiths of Eregion, foremost among them the lord of that land Celebrimbor, who had inherited much from his ancestor Fëanor. During his nearly 100-year-long stay in Eregion, Sauron mentored Celebrimbor and taught him much of the arts and magic, yet first and foremost of his teachings was of ring-making. It is in this way that Sauron deceived Celebrimbor into believing that forging the great rings of power might halt the decay of the world, which was felt most severely by the elves. During the period of forging, Barad-dûr was completed, and Glorfindel was once more reinstated to Middle-earth by Manwë, now bearing Maya levels of power. In total, 19 rings were forged by the elves, 16 of which Sauron, posing as Anatar, had a direct hand in. Yet the greatest three, bar the one secretly created in Middle-earth, were forged by Celebrimbor alone. The one ring was forged by Sauron in the hopes that he would be able to control the elves who now bore them. However, as soon as the ruling ring was placed upon the Dark Lord's finger, the elves immediately became aware of his malicious influence and removed theirs. Sauron, furious at the failure of his plan, came against the elves with all the force available to him in the year SA 1693, in what came to be known as the War of the Elves and Sauron. Messages detailing the betrayal of Anatar, now revealed to be the lieutenant of Morgoth, Sauron, were immediately sent north to Lindon. There, the High King Gil-galad began to prepare what forces were immediately available to him, while also sending a missive to Numenor requesting aid. The war truly commenced in SA 1695, as Sauron's forces crossed the fords of Isen and laid siege to Eregion. Celebrimbor, as Lord of Eregion, marshalled the defences of his land, while Elrond was sent at the head of a small army to reinforce the Forger of the Rings. However, the onslaught was such that by the time Elrond arrived at the capital of Ostinethil, the city had been razed to the ground, and Lord Celebrimbor lay amongst the fallen. The small force Elrond commanded, shocked to such an extent by the death of one of Fëanor's descendants at the hands of Sauron, was quickly routed. But then the dwarves of Khazad-dûm sallied forth to attack the Dark Lord's forces from the rear, which allowed the mauled elves a brief respite. Elrond engaged in a tactical retreat into the Misty Mountains, where he constructed a fortress within a secluded valley that came to be known as Rivendell in the years to come. The dwarves, meanwhile, retreated into Khazad-dûm, sealing the gates, aware that even at this stage their numbers were too few to contain the might of Mordor. At this stage, Sauron had recovered all of the rings, bar the 3 which had been given to the elves. In his planning of the campaign, their recovery was foremost within his mind as a result. The Dark Lord initially believed that all 3 were in the possession of the High King Gil-galad, when in fact he had retained only 2, so the brunt of the assault was to be focused upon his enemy of old. By the year SA 1699, the vicious assault of the vast hosts of Mordor had brought all of Eriador under Sauron's thumb, while a small force was sent to besiege Imladris and prevent Elrond from counter-attacking at the rear of the host. Further, the Grey Havens were besieged, and Lindon was entirely cut off from all aid, as Khazad-dûm and Rivendell would prove to be of little use in the battle that was to come. Yet hope came to Middle-earth once more from the west, when a vast Numenorian army was deployed upon the mainland for the first time in the history of that storied isle. Tar Minastir would not see his elven friends left to fight this battle alone. and sent a naval detachment under the command of Kayata to relieve Lindon. In these days, the average Numenorian stood on average 6 feet 4 inches tall and was arrayed in the finest arms and armour available, which drew a stark contrast to the ill-shapen orcish hosts they were to face. Lindon was immediately relieved by the arrival of these mighty warriors and their capable commander, while further Numenorian contingents were landed at Tharbad on the Gwathlo and further south near Pelagia. Kayata, bolstered by Gil-galad and his elven swordsmen, pushed the hosts of Sauron further south in a continuous retreat, with massive casualties being sustained near Sarn's Ford, which unsuspectingly brought them to the Gwathlo. With a second Numenorian army blocking their retreat, the vast host of Mordor, composed mainly of cowardly orcs, was left with little chance but to stand and fight. The Battle of the Gwathlo, as it came to be known, was an utterly one-sided affair. Organised ranks of highly trained, disciplined and formidable Numenorians, believed to number some 150,000 in total, provided both the hammer and anvil of this enterprise. The armies of Sauron were, therefore, utterly devastated at the hands of the men of the West, with a small contingent attempting to escape to the east of Kalanathon. Unbeknownst to this desperate few, yet more Numenorians were to descend upon them. The destruction of the host was so complete that Sauron was lucky simply to escape back to Mordor with naught more than a token bodyguard of the 600,000 he had brought forth to annihilate the elves. The elves under Gil-galad did not leave themselves idle either, marching upon the unsuspecting besiegers of Imladris and annihilating them with the aid of a sally from Elrond's survivors. Thus, the war of the elves and Sauron ended, with Sauron's might substantially destroyed to the point it would take him a full millennia to rebuild. However, the elves also suffered dearly in this war, as Eregion had ceased to exist, and Eriador was utterly devastated by the war which had been waged upon its soil. Sauron would swear revenge upon those who had dared to resist, bearing upon his already blackened soul a particularly grievous grudge upon the land of Numenor, which had utterly humbled him. Yet at this stage the Numenorian position seemed utterly unassailable, possessing a formidable and numerous force of warriors and mariners, and a base of operations that Sauron could not hope to reach. Such was their ascendancy at the zenith of the kingdom that permanent settlements continued to be established upon the mainland, which required naught more than a paltry garrison, for none amongst the peoples of that fair isle feared Sauron. Yet a healthy dose of fear may have saved the people of Numenor much suffering and woe, for what was to come would bring an end to their peaceful and prosperous existence for good and all. However, this is a tale for our next video on the history of the Second Age, which will focus on the return of Sauron, the corruption of the Numenorians, and the inevitable slide towards suffering and great sadness upon the shores of Middle-earth. The next few videos in this series will be dedicated to the efforts of the new Dark Lord to establish his dominance over all of Middle-earth. But we are planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.